National WIC Association, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar. We want to thank you for taking time to attend today's webinar, especially during this busy holiday season. A few housekeeping items. There will be a discussion and question and answer session at the end of today's webinar. If you notice on your control panel on the right side of your screen, in the little box to the left, there is a raise hand button. It's a little print of a little hand. If everyone would take time now and click that button just to make sure that's working, and then Hannah will put all those hands down, but that's what we'll use at the end of the webinar to answer those questions. So if everyone could do that right now. All right, today's webinar will also be recorded and available soon in our archives. And once that is done, we will let you know that. One CEU has been approved for today's webinar, and those will be emailed to you after today's presentation. We're excited today to have Dr. Rick Kite with us. Dr. Kite is the endowed professor of the D.B. Reinhardt Institute for Ethics and Leadership at Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin. There he teaches a variety of ethics courses dealing with issues in business, leadership, and the environment. He also writes a regular column for the La Crosse Tribune titled The Ethical Life, and has a book that was recently published in 2016 titled Ethical Business, Cultivating the Good in Organizational Culture. He gives about 30 presentations each year on ethics and leadership to organizations all over the country. He has presented recently at 2 WIC conferences, and he's been gaining a lot of popularity in the WIC community, and we're excited to have him with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Great. Thank you, Beth, and good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for attending this session. One of the things I'd like to do is just make it very clear that when it comes to ethics, I'm a generalist. That is, I teach ethics courses in a number of different disciplines, including a number of nutrition dietetic students we have here on my campus, Viterbo University, also nursing students. I've served on healthcare committees for health ethics committees at a couple of different hospitals, but I also participate in a number of organizations that deal with environmental ethics and business ethics and things like that. I don't presume to have the knowledge of your profession that you do. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is a model for ethical decision making, which presumes that you have the expertise in your field. And that what we want to do whenever we're trying to get some either consensus or just to get the best decision we can possibly make, either with colleagues or with our clients, we want to make sure that our conversation is clear, that we are listening in a way which elicits the best wisdom, insights, factual information, whatever might be relevant to helping us make the best possible decision. Just talking to others in a way that helps us to do that. And so we're going to start out today by talking a little bit about why ethics is important, especially in the field of nutrition and dietetics. And then we're also going to talk about a couple of methods for decision making. So what are some models for making a better decision? And then if we have time, we'll discuss some cases. And I've got a few cases at the end of this presentation, and we'll see how it works to have a discussion via webinar. That might be a little bit challenging. It's, of course, a lot easier to do this in person, but we'll give it a shot. The main thing, though, is what the central part, the middle portion of this presentation on an ethical decision-making model. Some of you may have heard this story that just came out November 21st. That is the Monday before Thanksgiving, a story about Kellogg and how experts, independent experts, were paid to promote their cereal products. I came across this story in my local hometown newspaper, the La Crosse Tribune, because it was a AP or Associated Press story written by Candace Choi. And because it was an AP story, it came out in newspapers all over the country. It was also picked up by a number of websites, and for example, Fortune magazine and organizations like that. And the story is basically this, that Kellogg started a breakfast council. This is a few years ago. And what they said was, in response to more and more information that children especially were not eating breakfast, and that it was a very important meal of the day. So they put together a breakfast council of independent experts to provide information and to promote their cereal products and promote the importance of eating breakfast. When I read a story like this as a member of the general public, I read it and I think there's something wrong here. There's something wrong here with these are supposed to be independent experts. They don't look independent because nowhere on their website is it mentioned that each of the experts is paid $13,000 a year, that they're given talking points, that they are required to engage in, quote, nutrition influencer outreach. And so as a member of the general public, what happens is people get concerned about the profession. Well, are people who are registered dietitians, are they really independent? If I go down to my local clinic and I'm getting advice on meals I should eat to handle my diabetes, am I being given good independent advice or not? And this is precisely why ethics is so important for professions, and not only for dietitians, but for every single profession. There's a great concern with ethics because the actions of just a few people, if it reaches some national prominence, can have damaging effects on the reputation of the whole profession. And that is before we even get to the point of actually examining, was there anything wrong with what happened with the Breakfast Council and Kellogg? We haven't even looked at that. There's just a story here raising questions about it. So it's very important that members of any profession know how to talk about something like this. So when questions come up among say, your own colleagues or your clients, just your friends and neighbors and so forth, you know how to respond when topics like this come up. So how do we know what to do? Well, you are fortunate to have a very great resource in the American Dietetic Association. EatRightPro.org has wonderful resources on how to go through making decisions and a code of ethics and so forth. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But here is one of the case studies that appears on this website on EatRightPro.org. And this is one of the case studies that appears just for discussion. It doesn't tell you what to do, it just raises a question. And I'll just read it. And registered dietetic consultant receives a free package of cereal in the mail from a cereal company for which she serves as a consultant. The RD consultant writes a blog about this cereal's health benefits for her personal website, where she has listed all her current clients on the About Me page. Does she need to disclose the free cereal she received in the blog itself? Well, it's a real good question, and it's the sort of question that comes up fairly frequently. And I want to add that it's not just something that comes up frequently for dietitians. This is something that would come up for somebody who is a realtor, a banker, an engineer, a surveyor, and all kinds of professions. There are questions about transparency, about conflicts of influence, about disclosure, and so forth. And that's why we have ethics codes. So how do you find your ethics code? So let me just end the slideshow a bit here and go on to the website of EatRightPro.org. I just want to make sure you know how to find your code of ethics and other ethics resources on this website, because it's a great resource for you. I don't have any connection with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I just, like other people, would like to go on the sites of different professional associations and see what they are offering their members for resources. So if you click on career and you can go down to code of ethics, what you will find is some resources. One is, what is the code of ethics right here? The other is ethics education resources. Under the ethics education resources, there are a lot of different cases that are given with suggestions about the main things you should think about. If you go to the code of ethics, you will get the code of ethics itself. It's right here, code of ethics for the profession of dietetics resources. And here you have the code of ethics for the profession. And it's nicely laid out. It goes into a great deal of depth. In a presentation like this one, we don't have the time to go through every one of these in depth. And yet what I want to mention is this. There's a reason you have 18 different principles in this code of ethics. Every single one of them presents is a response to situations where members of the profession have done something that raises significant questions about ethical conduct and probably calls into question the reputation of members of the profession. And so a code of ethics like this is designed to address kind of preventively or proactively the primary sorts of issues that come up so that all members of the profession can protect the integrity and the reputation of the profession. And it begins with two fundamental principles. The dietetics practitioner conducts herself with honesty, integrity, and fairness. And second, the dietetics practitioner supports and promotes high standards of professional practice. And so you have here the two main things. First of all, the importance of this honesty, integrity, and fairness. That is the importance of being ethical for its own sake. Number two, high standards of professional practice. That is the obligation to protect the reputation of the profession. And then there's several others. I'm going to go back to the presentation so that we can, excuse me here. I'm going to go back to the presentation so that we can continue. And we have some of the, I have several of the principles of the Code of Ethics in the presentation itself, so we don't have to keep jumping back and forth from the presentation to the website. Here is one other thing I want to draw your attention to, and this is the issue of employee engagement. And this is the second reason why ethics is so important for any profession. One is the protecting of the reputation of the profession. That's what we were just talking about. The other is this issue of employee engagement. It's a sad fact that for a long time now, probably about 30 years, as long as the Gallup organization has been measuring employee engagement across professions, that about 30% on average, about 30% of American workers respond that they are engaged in their work. And you can see this from 2000, I think, to 2012. It's anywhere from 28 to 30% engagement levels. Workers who report that they are not engaged is always around 50%, and there's about 18, 19, 20% that report that they are actively disengaged. These are the people who not only are not interested or don't care much about what they're doing, but actively work to frustrate the ends of their own organization. This is really a dismal finding, and it's even more dismal when you realize that it is across professions. I just represent in this chart nurses, teachers, construction workers, and clerical workers, but you see about the same, around 30% for every profession of engagement. That's at the top, the green. The red is not engaged. That's about 50% of each profession. And then about 15 to 20% of actively disengaged. I've been teaching ethics for a long time, and especially when I teach ethics to adults, and I talk to them about the state of their workplace. One of the things I notice is a real direct correlation between people's level of engagement and their perception of ethics in the place where they work. Most of us want to be really proud of the place we work and think that it reflects something about we're not only proud of where we work, but our identity is found in what we do, the profession that we hold, and the people that we work with. But if we don't believe that our colleagues are acting ethically, it is very difficult for us to hold that identity as strongly. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news the last month or so, but if you've heard anything about the scandal at Wells Fargo, where they laid off 5,000 employees for unethical conduct. This represents less than 5% of their employee base, and yet the fraud and the manipulation of customers' accounts and so forth is really bad. It's especially bad in something like banking, where client confidentiality and protection of their interests and so forth is paramount. But you have 95% of the employees who didn't do anything wrong, and yet I would imagine it's very difficult for them any longer to say that with pride that they work with Wells Fargo. And so this is why this ethics is so critical for engagement at your level. You have to believe that not only are you ethical, but the people you work with are also ethical. Now the question is, how do we do that? So this is where we go back to this code. Code of ethics is designed to set a standard to protect reputation, but then also give each of us, who are members of a profession, a common set of standards that we can rely on, that we can know that we can follow and that colleagues can follow, so that we know that what we're doing is respectable and responsible and for the common good. So we already discussed these first two principles. I'm going to just go over the other ones pretty quickly. We're not going to spend time in detail because this is something that you can do on your own, and I think it's well worth doing. But I'm just going to highlight a few things in here till we get on to the later slides. Dietetics practitioner considers health, safety, welfare at all times. If you focus on always the question, what is the health, safety, and welfare of the people I'm serving? This is always a good guide. Complies with laws and regulations, of course. Number 5, provides professional services with objectivity, with respect for the needs and values of individuals. Does not engage in false or misleading practices or communications. This is something where you might say, well, the Kellogg's case, there's an example. If members of this breakfast council were making claims on social media that a certain cereal was their favorite cereal to eat, or that they're eating every morning, and they really weren't, or they're saying it's their favorite but it's not their favorite, or saying they believe in its health benefits when they don't, this would be false or misleading communications. So this is a way in which it provides, I think, some pretty common sense guidance for a lot of things. Number 7, dietetics practitioner withdraws from professional practice when able to fulfill his or her professional duties and responsibilities to clients and others. Number 8, this is a very important part of the code that we'll come back to. The dietetics practitioner recognizes and exercises professional judgment within the limits of his or her qualifications and collaborates with others, seeks counsels, or make referrals as appropriate. So the key thing here is an understanding of what do I know, what am I trained to know, what is the kind of the extent and limitations of my professional training and ability, and when do I need to collaborate and get advice from others or make referrals to others who have more expertise in a certain area that perhaps my client needs. So let's just go on here. Number 12, dietetic practitioner practices dietetics based on evidence-based principles and current information. So of course a lot of this might seem pretty obvious to you, and yet these are tremendously important because every one of these principles is based on something where somebody in the profession at some point has failed to do the right thing. And so it was thought to be important to make it explicit. Okay, next part of this presentation. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. And this slide here, this 4A method for ethical decision making, this is something that I would hope that if you are interested in making decisions with groups and so forth, this is something you might be able to take this one slide out and print it out and use it as a reference. And that is because whether it's in our personal lives or professional lives, we are always confronted by decisions which fall outside the scope of what we might predict. They fall into certain gray areas where it's really not clear, even if you would say look through the code of ethics in some detail, it's really not clear still what I ought to do in a particular instance. In those cases where it's not clear what I ought to do, I find that it's really important to seek the advice of others. How do we talk with somebody else about the right or wrong thing to do in cases where we're not sure? Most of our significant ethical problems fall into this realm where it's not really clear. Another place where this is very useful to have some where this decision-making model is designed for is in cases where we have a group of people, say a team that is discussing a difficult case, and we've all got a different perspective and access to a little bit different information, and are inclined to reach a different conclusion. How do we have the most productive conversation possible? Well, what I've found over time is that if you just open a case up for discussion, people generally will focus on one mode of ethical reasoning and not realize that they're doing that. And this presents problems when, say, you are focused on one mode of ethical reasoning and another person is using a different mode of ethical reasoning, and you're just not coming together on the same page. Here's why this is important. There are really 4 ways of thinking about what's right or wrong or good or bad, and they're represented on this sheet here. You can see it here. Truth is the first one, consequences is the second, fairness is the third, character is the fourth. Let's think about truth. Truth is just our apprehension of what's really going on. What's going on and what's relevant, what matters to any particular situation. I have a set of questions here that you can ask to try to get at the truth, but the questions are just suggestions. There's many ways that we can try to get at the truth, but we can ask, for example, what are the facts, what are the relevant laws, what are the policies within my organization, and then what are the relevant professional standards, or for example, the code of ethics for dietitians. That's all ways of asking questions which just get at what's going on and what is the relevant background information that pertains to this case. This is one way of thinking about something that's really important. Another way of thinking about things is consequences. And oftentimes when we think about what's right or wrong in a particular case, we are looking at, well, what will happen if I do this? What would happen if I do that? Doing different things has different results, of course. And so for the first question to ask when thinking about consequences is, what are the possible solutions to a problem? And then you need to think, well, and then who are the people most likely to be affected by each of these possible solutions? How are they going to be affected? And then which solutions are most beneficial or least harmful? If you notice, truth is if we're thinking about truth, we're just thinking about like what is going on here. When we're thinking about consequences, we're focused on the future. What will happen if? And these are hypotheticals. Go down here to fairness. This is a very different way of thinking about what's right and wrong. We are thinking here about how people are treated, not just about what will happen if, but are people being treated with respect? Are people being treated with dignity? How would I feel if somebody treated me in that way? So the golden rule, for example, is an example of thinking with fairness. Always treat people the way you would want to be treated is an example of thinking with fairness. So it's really important to distinguish these. Thinking of consequences, say thinking about the future. Fairness, thinking about the process with which we arrive at a decision, and and I guess you could say it's asking, is everybody included on this? Are people really being listened to? Are they being respected? Is their input being valued? Fourth, character. Character is tremendously important because when we think about character, we are thinking about people's motivations. And we are evaluating the person rather than the action itself or the process. So when we think about character, we're usually thinking about what are called virtues or vices that are good character traits or bad character traits. So we can ask, is a certain action being done with compassion? Is it being done with generosity, with care or concern, with respect? Or is it being done out of greed or maliciousness or spite? So you're really evaluating the motivations of the person who's doing something. And one way of getting at this is, if you look at that bottom question here, will the proposed solution be implemented in a way that helps build trusting relationships? In just about every case, if we act with the virtues, that is, if we act out of generosity, courage, wisdom, compassion, we're acting in a way that leads people to trust us, and over time especially leads to trusting relationships. Whereas if we act out of the vices, if we act out of spite or maliciousness or self-regard, we are acting in ways that erode trust and makes it harder to gain people's trust or work with them in the future. Now my claim is that there are these four ways of thinking about what's right and wrong, good or bad, and that's all there are. There is not a fifth way. Anytime anybody makes any kind of argument or a claim about why something would be right or wrong or good or bad, they're using at least one of these four ways of thinking. Moreover, we all learn these four ways of thinking from a very early age. From the time you are 3 years old or so, as soon as you learn to speak the language, you are already using all four ways of these thinking. And you will become more sophisticated in each of them as you get older. What ethics requires of us is that we learn to use each of these ways of thinking well. That is when we examine consequences, we don't look at consequences just superficially. We look at them in some depth. What are the real consequences, not just to me, and maybe not just the person who I am acting upon, but others who might be more indirectly involved. And that I really give a thorough consideration to them and try to weigh out which solutions are ultimately most beneficial and the least harmful. when I look at fairness, I really try to consider as empathetically as possible, what would it be like to be on the recipient of one of my actions? And am I working out of a process that everybody involved would regard as fair or just or motivated out of, say, a sense of equality? And the same thing with character. Am I really acting in the most compassionate or reverent or courageous fashion? So what ethics requires is that we engage in each one of these kind of fully and to some depth. The other thing ethics require is that we not use one of these while we exclude the others. And this is a real challenge. And it is a challenge just because of the way our minds work. When it comes to many matters where we have some direct involvement, where we really have some interests at stake, what we tend to do is we'll pick out the conclusion that we would like, what result would we like, and then we'll use whatever way of thinking helps us justify that decision. And because we've been using all four of these ways of thinking our whole lives, it is easy for us to, without even consciously doing it, just subconsciously focus on the consequences or focus on the fairness or the character or the truth, whatever happens to work best, and just make that our exclusive way of thinking. This becomes really problematic when we're in a group of people, because while I might pick out consequences as the way that I really want to focus on a particular decision, I might be talking to you and you're thinking about character. So while I'm thinking about what will happen if we do this, you're thinking about what is motivating my choice of behavior. And we're focused on really two very different things. We're talking about the same action, but we're thinking about it in very different ways. And if we don't realize that, it can create some real problems in our attempts to reach agreement. Let me give you an example here from my own life. While I was developing this four-way method for ethical decision making, I was using it in classes and trying it out and so forth. And I was always telling my students, make sure that whenever you're confronted with an ethical decision, you don't just jump right into it. You always step back and think reflectively about each of the four ways of thinking. Anyway, as I was teaching these classes one day, I come home from work, I walk into the door of the house, into the kitchen, and here's my wife and my teenage son, who was 14 at the time, having a heated argument about whether he can have a sleepover. He's saying he wants to have a sleepover with some friends. Four of his friends have talked about this at school. It's a Thursday. And they all want to have a sleepover at this friend's house. My wife is saying, you can't have a sleepover on a Thursday night. You've got to get up early to go to school tomorrow. You can have sleepovers on Fridays and Saturdays, but not on Thursdays. My son's saying, I'm old enough to make decisions for myself. We talked this over. We're all gonna go to bed early. Then he says, all the other parents said it was okay for their kids to have a sleepover. Why won't you treat me the same as the other parents? My wife says, this isn't about what the other parents are saying. This is about you. This is about being responsible. You've got a biology test in the morning. You need to study for this biology test. My son is saying, we talked about that. We're all in the same class. We're going to study together, and then we're going to go to sleep early. She's saying, I know you guys. You're not going to do that. This argument was going on for a while. I walk into the room. What happens when you walk into a room, there's a heated argument going on, and people's interests are at stake, you tend to react. And so both of them turn to me and they say, what do you think? Well, what do I think? I mean, what I'm always saying is you have to step back from a situation like that and reflect and especially listen to the kinds of reasons each person is giving and try to respond using the same kind of reasoning. But of course I didn't do that. That's not human nature. So I just jump in and I end up repeating everything my wife has been saying for the last 20 minutes about how you can't have a sleepover on a Thursday night, you've got a test in the morning, you need to get your sleep, you can have a sleepover on Friday or Saturday instead. I just end up saying the same thing. Well, take a look again at this four-way method. And let me ask you, what kind of reasoning, what kind of thinking is my wife using, and what was I using at the same time? Well, if you look at that, you'll see it's pretty obvious. It was consequences, and this, in most disputes between parents and their children, the parents tend to focus on consequences because their primary consideration is with the safety and well-being of their children. So we were focused only on consequences, and it was the only thing we were talking about. My son, on the other hand, was focused on fairness. Again, this is fairly typical of teenagers. Teenagers tend to be want to be asserting their autonomy. They want to be treated the same as adults, even though they haven't yet reached adulthood. So they're in the process of gaining more autonomy, but they're really keyed in on this idea of fairness. And what happened as the argument went on, both sides got more frustrated with one another. And this is something which you'll generally observe. People don't get more reasonable the more they talk about something if they have a disagreement. They tend to get less reasonable. So the more they talk about something, the angrier and more frustrated they get with one another. And one of the reasons they're getting more frustrated is because both sides have the perception that the other side isn't listening. And that's actually true. Because my wife and I were focused just on consequences, every time my son would say something having to do with fairness, we would respond talking about more consequences. And we were frustrated with him because every time we mentioned consequences of different kinds, he would respond with more concerns about fairness. To both sides, it seemed like the other side wasn't being reasonable. And this is largely not because either side is unethical, but because both of us, my wife and I and our son, we're both being pretty narrow-minded. We're only focusing on one way of thinking about this. And I say this with some, a little bit of embarrassment, because this is what I'm always telling my students: don't do that. Always step back. But it is very hard, and it is really hard once you get involved in the discussion, once you've taken a side especially. It is really hard to step back and to think reflectively about all the different ways of thinking. So I didn't realize it until the next day. I get to work, I'm teaching ethics classes, and I realize, oh my goodness, I've been doing exactly what I'm always telling my students not to do. I always say, don't just jump in, but step back and think about all four ways. Anyway, I come home from work that night, Friday night. I asked my wife, I said, whatever happened with the sleepover deal? And she says, well, I talked to all the parents of the other kids, and they all said that they were having the same problem. They all had the same argument at their homes. None of the parents thought the sleepover was a good idea. And so the kids ended up having it on Friday night. What we had failed to do is to start with truth. If we had just picked up the phone, called some other parents and said, is this sleepover happening? Have you discussed it? And so forth, we would have found out that there's no point in even having the argument. Truth is the part of all these four ways of thinking, is the one that tends to get overlooked the most. Both sides will often just assume that the other side has the access to the same information, and usually that's not the case. So let's go on. How do we deal with this? Well, here's a real life example, and this comes from a student of mine in a graduate program that we teach here. And I was teaching an ethics course. I gave these students a four-way method. This one student was a supervising engineer at a manufacturing plant, and he had come home from work, and this you can see on the email here, 6:07 at night. He gets his email from Welder Utility that a light just fell, and you can see the light fixture down here on the floor. This is one of these large steel fixtures that holds the long fluorescent tubes. Very heavy, and would have been very serious if it had hit somebody. The ceiling is about 30 feet high in this building, and there's about 500 of these light fixtures. Mark, who received this email, was really concerned. So he calls up the person who sent the email and he says, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, we don't know yet. Looking into it, I'll give you a report in the morning." So Mark comes to work the next morning. He sits down with the head of maintenance and he asks him, "Well, what's going on with the lights?" Head of maintenance says, "Well, we found out what the problem was. This particular light it's suspended by chains from the ceiling, and it is attached to a bolt with a nut, and this one was installed without lock nuts. And so the nuts came loose. There was a fan vibrating nearby, caused those nuts to come loose, and it fell." He says, "But we looked at the 5 lights right around this one, and they were all installed properly, so this is an isolated incident." Mark is thinking to himself, but we have 500 lights in this facility. One fell, we've inspected 5. There are 494 lights that we don't know anything about. But the head of maintenance has just said, it's an isolated incident, we've taken care of it. What does he do? He looks over on his desk, and he has this copy of this 4-way method sitting on his desk, and he pulls it out, and he says to the head of maintenance, "Let's just make sure we've talked about this and go through it thoroughly." Now I want you to notice what Mark did in this case. He did not take a position. If he takes a position, then he and his head of maintenance, they're at odds right away, and then they're arguing against one another. Instead of arguing against one another, he just says, "Let's make sure we've thought through this." And so he puts them in a situation where they can both be reflective and really dispassionate and talk about this. So they go through the 4-way method. They talk about truth. How many lights are there? What do we know about them? How long will it take to inspect all of them? This sort of thing. They go to consequences. What would happen if another light falls? What if another light would fall and hit somebody? How much will it cost to do this inspection? How much? What is our liability if a light falls and injures or kills somebody? All of these questions about consequences. Then they go to fairness. What if you are one of the workers who is at a station every day directly underneath one of the light fixtures that has not been inspected? Would you want that one inspected? Yeah, I guess I would. You go to character. We're a company that claims to care about its employees. What does a caring company do in a case like this? They just go through, they have a discussion, took them about 15 minutes, and they come to the end of it. The head of maintenance says to Mark, "We need to inspect all those lights." And so they do. They inspect all the lights. They find 7 of them that are installed without lock nuts. So they fix those lights. And the head of maintenance is proud of their resolution. So I think we might have saved a life today. Now, this is tremendously important because it can apply to any kind of workplace, any kind of profession. When you're working with colleagues, you want the ethical discussions to be something where you come up with a solution and reach agreement. If you can, you want to reach it in consensus. And it's very difficult to do that if you started out by positional argumentation. One of you taking one position, the other taking the other one, and seeing who wins, because then you've got a winner and a loser. What Mark realized in his wisdom is, let's have the discussion before I take any position at all, and then we can both be winners in this case. All right, here's a few cases that we have about, I guess we've got 13 minutes left to talk about these. And so let's start with this first one. This is a case study that comes from eatrightpro.org. There's several case studies on that website on the resources page. And here's one. A registered dietitian has just taken a position as part of a treatment team in an ambulatory care setting. After several sessions, one of the clients he is counseling for obesity management discloses that she is being physically abused by her spouse and feels depressed. After this revelation, the RDN encourages the client to continue the nutrition counseling sessions so that he might better understand the relationship between her domestic situation, psychological state, and weight issues. During a regular treatment team meeting, the RDN reports on the client and is questioned by one of the team members about why he did not refer the client to the mental health professional. What should the RDN and the team member do in this situation? So could we open this up to people that might want to ask questions?
Absolutely.
Hannah, can you do that?
Yeah, if you all raise your hands, if anyone who would like to ask a question or comment, I will unmute you. Christine Longstaff, it looks like you are, actually, you know what? It looks like you need to enter your audio pin, and then I'll be able to unmute you. Connie, I've unmuted you.
Hi, Connie.
Maybe not. Connie, we can come back to you. Rita Arney, you are unmuted.
Hi, this is Rita, and you know I had my hand raised because at the beginning of the session you said to raise it, so that's why it was raised.
It's still raised.
All right, I thought I put those down. Maybe I didn't, so we can move on. How about Julie Griffith? Oh, all right, I'll put that down. You know what? I'm going to put everybody's hand down for a moment. Maybe it's not letting me.
I tell you what, Hannah, I'm just going to say a few things about this case, and then we'll move to the next one, and we'll try it again with the next case.
Okay.
That's
I
all
put
right?
everyone's hands down, so we should be good to go now.
Okay.
A lot are coming back up. So would you like to go ahead with this case or move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's go ahead with this one. Does somebody have a hand up?
Yeah, so Amanda Flint, I have unmuted you.
I don't have a question.
Amanda?
I don't have a question, sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just say a couple of quick remarks. This is the sort of case where you can go through the code of ethics and you'll find some of the items in the code to be especially relevant to this. For example, principle number 8, that recognizing that and then exercising professional judgment within the limits of his or her qualifications, and then collaborating with others, seeking counsel, and making referrals as appropriate. So for something like this, to recognize that what is the scope of my training, and then where are concerns arising that fall outside of my training where I have to make a referral. The other thing that I think is really important is when you're working with a team, and you've got people that have different insights and so forth, sometimes you'll want to have a method for just having the discussion. That's where you can bring in something like the 4-way method to just kind of guide the discussion. So as we talk about this client and we have people with different insights here, we can just go through the truth, what is in the code of ethics, what are the facts about this case, and then go on to consequences, like of different possible solutions we might have to the case. What would be the consequences for this client? What would be fair? What would be treating the client in a way that I think I would wish to be treated? And which kind of treatment or what options could we bring to bear that would be virtuous, that are properly motivated? So let me just go on here. Here's a second case. And we'll try the hands thing again and see if we can make it work. So a skilled long-term facility patient with severe dementia tells a registered dietitian nutritionist that she no longer wants to be fed via her gastronomy feeding tube. She has no advance directive. The resident's daughter wants her mother to be fed. What is the RDN's role in this situation, and what should be done? Any observations about this one? Where do we start?
Kitty, I have unmuted you. It looks like you just put your hand down, though. How about Maggie Domsky? Maggie, I've unmuted you if you'd like to make a comment. All right.
Okay.
How about Julie?
Julie, is it Ornelas?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I would think in this situation you want to first look at the law.
Yeah, the law is really important. So that falls under the truth section, right? And
Right.
And every state is going to have slightly different laws in cases like this regarding advance directives, and especially cases where there is not an advance directive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of these things. It's really hard to say, to give one kind of recommendation. So this is what you ought to do nationally, because the state's laws are going to vary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so really good observation.
All right. Let's see here. How about Kathy Winston? Do you have a comment, Kathy? No? Victoria Williams? All right.
Okay, Hannah, let me just, because we only have 5 minutes left, let me just make a couple observations about this. And then here is a case where if you're in a setting that has an ethics committee, it's probably a case where you want to go to the ethics committee and get their input on this, because this would be the type of case that they would deal with on a regular basis. The other thing is having a discussion with the daughter. Lots of times in cases like this, just sitting down and having a discussion where you don't just set yourself in opposition, saying you think that the mother should not be fed where she wants the daughter to be fed, but just sitting down and saying, let's make sure we really are on the same page and we understand what's going on. And that's where I find something like this four-way method can be very helpful to kind of depersonalize the discussion so that the daughter isn't in the position of feeling like she has to defend her position or defend her mother against you or the institution that you're representing. And so just having something like that can sometimes be a useful device. But sitting down and having a discussion is key to making sure that there's an understanding in this case. Let's go on to the last case here. A registered dietitian nutritionist discovers misinformation posted by an RDN on a blog. The blogger's posting is not in agreement with the non-government organization's recommendations and current scientific evidence. The RDN reader is familiar with the topic because he consults for a food company that relies on the NGO's information to support their brand messages. The RDN reader knows that the blogger is incorrect in perpetuating myths and also worries that it could be considered a conflict of interest for the RDN reader to correct the blogger on the site. So here's a case where there's a couple of different concerns about potential conflict of interest, and and things like this can get complex pretty quickly. The main concern here is that the person who reads the blog acts out of principle number 3, that is, considers the health, safety, and welfare of the public at all times. If there's misinformation being posted, and it's misinformation that presents serious concerns for people that might read this blog, it is important then, a professional responsibility to address it. But it also has to be addressed in a way that is completely transparent. And so the reader would have to make sure that he is completely forthcoming about his or her role in consulting for the food company using the NGO's information. So lots of times what you can do is you want to put together different principles to say, okay, I have an obligation to address this, but I also have to address it in a way that is entirely transparent. And so what I would recommend in conclusion here is that you make use of this website, the eatrightpro.org, and those resources. There are a number of cases on here that are fairly interesting to go through. And it's so important to think through some of these cases in advance before you encounter them on your own. Finally, last thing here is I just want to make sure that you have my contact information. If you have any questions for me or comments, anything you'd like to discuss at all, feel free to contact me at my email address here. And I want to thank you very much for your attention during this webinar, and hope you have a good afternoon.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kite. I am going to stop the recording and we will be sharing it with all of you shortly.